On a freezing winter night, a man living alone in the woods heard desperate cries outside his cabin. 2 dogs were collapsing from the cold. He brought them in without hesitation, never knowing they hadn't come alone. By morning, police surrounded his home, and the dogs were the reason why. Before this story begins, I want you to pause for just a moment, because what you're about to hear is not just another animal rescue. It's a chain reaction of compassion, instinct, and courage that unfolded in the most unexpected way. If you believe that kindness still matters, that small choices can change lives, and that animals sometimes understand danger before humans ever do, then you're in the right place. Right now, take a second to like this video, because it helps these real-life rescue stories reach people who need hope today. Subscribe to the channel if you want to be part of a community that believes in protecting the voiceless, both human and animal. And as you listen, stay until the very end, because the truth behind this rescue reveals a twist no one in that quiet American town saw coming. Also, I love hearing from you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because these stories travel farther than we ever imagine. What began as a freezing night and a desperate act of mercy would soon pull police, hidden danger, and a brave decision into one life-changing moment. This isn't just about saving animals. It's about how compassion can accidentally expose the truth, and how doing the right thing can put everything at risk. Let's begin. The storm rolled in faster than anyone predicted, swallowing the backroads of Michigan's Upper Peninsula beneath sheets of ice and wind. By nightfall, the world beyond the tree line had vanished into white silence. Inside a weather-beaten cabin near the edge of Huron National Forest, Caleb Rourke adjusted the thermostat and listened to the old heater hum like a tired animal. At 58, Caleb had learned to live with quiet. A former firefighter turned seasonal wildlife volunteer, he'd chosen isolation after a career spent running toward chaos. The cabin wasn't much, 1 bedroom, a wood porch, and a narrow gravel drive, but it was enough. Enough space to breathe. Enough distance from sirens and memories that still woke him some nights. He was halfway through reheating a bowl of stew when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the wind. Soft. Broken. Almost swallowed by the storm. Caleb froze, spoon hovering midair. Another whimper followed, higher pitched this time, desperate. Not a fox. Not a deer. He knew those sounds too well. Setting the bowl down, he pulled on his boots and heavy coat, grabbing the flashlight from the hook by the door. The cold hit him like a slap as he stepped outside. Snow stung his face, the beam of light cutting through swirling flakes. Then he saw them. 2 dogs, young, shaking uncontrollably, huddled beneath his porch steps. Their fur was crusted with ice, paws raw and bleeding from the cold. One pressed tightly against the other, trembling so hard Caleb could feel it from a distance. "Hey, it's okay," he said quietly, crouching down. The larger dog lifted its head, eyes locked onto his with a look Caleb had seen before, fear mixed with trust. The kind that came when survival had run out of options. He didn't hesitate. Scooping them into his arms, Caleb turned back toward the cabin, unaware that this single act, opening his door to 2 freezing animals, had just placed him at the center of something far darker than a winter storm. The cabin warmed quickly, but the dogs didn't relax. Caleb laid them on a thick wool blanket near the heater, gently rubbing their legs to bring feeling back into their paws. One was lean and wiry with a torn ear, the other smaller, darker, and trembling so hard its teeth chattered. He fetched an old first aid kit, cleaning the raw skin and wrapping their paws with practiced hands. "These aren't strays," he muttered under his breath. Strays wandered. These dogs had run. They drank warm water mixed with broth like they hadn't eaten in days, then collapsed beside each other, still watching the door. Their eyes tracked every creak of the cabin, every hiss of the heater. Even when Caleb dimmed the lights and sat back in his chair, they didn't sleep. They listened. So did he. Around midnight, the wind shifted. The storm thinned into a sharp, brittle silence, the kind that made the woods feel alert. That's when the dogs stiffened. Both heads snapped toward the front door. A low growl rolled from the larger one's chest. Caleb stood slowly. "What is it?" Then came the knock. Not loud, not frantic. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Caleb's pulse spiked. Nobody came this far out in weather like this. He reached for the porch light but stopped when the dogs moved in front of him, bodies rigid, teeth bared, not at him, but at the door. "Calm down," he whispered, though his own voice betrayed him. He stepped closer, peering through the frosted window. Nothing. No shadow. No footprints. Just snow and darkness. The knock came again. 3 times. This time, the smaller dog let out a sharp bark that echoed through the cabin. Caleb didn't answer. Every instinct he'd honed over decades screamed caution. He quietly slid the deadbolt into place and stepped back. The knocking stopped. Minutes passed. Then more. Eventually, the dogs settled, but not into sleep. They stayed pressed against the door until dawn, ears twitching, breathing shallow. Caleb sat with his back to the wall, eyes open, waiting. Whatever had followed those dogs to his cabin hadn't given up. It was just waiting for daylight. Dawn didn't arrive gently. It came with flashing lights. The dogs were the first to react, leaping to their feet, barking sharply as a distant mechanical whine sliced through the quiet morning. Caleb pushed himself up from the chair, joints stiff, heart instantly alert. Years as a firefighter had trained his body to recognize that sound. Sirens. He pulled back the curtain. Red and blue lights strobed against the snow-covered pines, turning the forest into something unreal. 3 police vehicles crawled up the narrow access road, tires crunching loudly over ice. Behind them, a dark SUV followed, unmarked. Caleb's stomach dropped. The dogs barked harder now, spinning, noses pressed to the door as if confirming what they'd known all along. This wasn't about them being rescued. This was about what they'd brought with them. A voice boomed from outside. "Occupant inside the cabin, this is the county sheriff's department. Please remain inside and come to the door slowly." Caleb raised his hands instinctively, even before opening it. He cracked the door just enough to see officers fanned across his yard, hands near their holsters, breath fogging the air. "I'm unarmed," he said calmly. "What's going on?" A tall sheriff stepped forward, eyes scanning past Caleb and into the cabin. "Sir, we received reports of an armed suspect fleeing into these woods last night after a violent incident in Marquette. He was injured. We tracked blood and boot prints leading here." Caleb's chest tightened. "I didn't see anyone," he said truthfully. "But I did hear knocking around midnight. I didn't answer. That changed everything." The sheriff's gaze snapped back to him. "You're certain?" Before Caleb could answer again, one of the dogs slipped past his legs, darting onto the porch. It lowered its head, sniffing the boards near the steps, then barked sharply, once, before pawing at a loose plank. An officer knelt, brushing away snow. Beneath the porch was a strip of torn fabric soaked dark red. The forest hadn't been quiet last night. It had been hiding something. The air shifted instantly. Radios crackled. Boots moved. The calm professionalism of the officers sharpened into focus. "Secure the area," the sheriff ordered. "No one moves without eyes on them." Caleb stepped back, heart pounding as one deputy carefully bagged the blood-stained fabric. Another circled the cabin, photographing the porch, the steps, the shallow tracks leading away into the trees. The dogs stood rigid between Caleb and the forest, eyes locked forward, bodies angled as if guarding an invisible line. "They're not reacting randomly," one officer murmured. "They're tracking." The sheriff crouched beside them. "Sir, when you found these dogs, were they already injured?" "No," Caleb said. "Cold. Scared. But not hurt like that." That was all the confirmation they needed. A deputy followed the larger dog as it stepped cautiously into the snow, nose low, tail stiff. The smaller one stayed close, stopping every few feet to look back, making sure the humans were still following. "This is a fresh trail," the deputy said. "Human. Heavy boots. Bleeding." The sheriff exhaled slowly. He doubled back. "Used the dogs to throw us off." Caleb's jaw clenched. "You're saying whoever did this was here, at my door?" The sheriff met his eyes. "Yes." "And those dogs either escaped or were abandoned when they stopped being useful." As if on cue, the larger dog barked sharply and veered left, heading toward a dense section of spruce where the snow looked disturbed. The officers followed, spacing out, weapons drawn but controlled. Beneath the trees, half buried in snow, lay a canvas backpack. Inside, bundled cash, a handgun, and a blood-soaked glove. "That's our robbery," the sheriff said grimly. "He ditched the evidence." The dogs didn't linger. They moved on, pulling the line deeper into the forest. Caleb swallowed hard, realizing the truth. These animals hadn't just needed saving. They had led danger straight to his door, then stayed to protect him from it. Somewhere ahead, the man who knocked in the night was still out there. And the dogs were determined to finish what they started. The trail narrowed as the forest thickened, the snow beneath their boots packed hard and streaked with red. The dogs slowed now, movements tighter, more deliberate. Every few steps, the larger one stopped, ears high, testing the air. The smaller dog stayed close to Caleb's leg, glancing back as if checking his position before pressing on again. "Suspects close," a deputy whispered into his radio. The woods fell unnaturally quiet. No wind. No birds. Just the faint crunch of snow and controlled breathing. Then the dogs froze. Both stared toward a shallow ravine ahead, where the ground dipped sharply and shadows pooled between exposed roots. A low growl rippled from the larger dog's chest. Not fear, but warning. Sheriff Nolan raised his fist. Everyone stopped. From below came a sound, labored, uneven breathing. "Sheriff's Department." Nolan called out. "You're surrounded. Come out slowly with your hands where we can see them." Silence. Caleb felt his pulse in his ears. He thought about the midnight knock. The patience in it. The calculation. A figure shifted in the ravine. A man staggered forward, pale, soaked in blood from his left side. His jacket hung torn and heavy, eyes sunken and wild. In his shaking hand, nothing. The weapon was gone. "I didn't hurt anyone," the man rasped. The dogs barked sharply, holding their ground. "You robbed a gas station and shot a clerk," Nolan replied. "He's alive because help arrived in time. Step forward." "No." The man swayed, then collapsed to his knees. The fight drained from him as deputies rushed in, securing his hands and checking his wounds. Relief hit Caleb like a wave. As the man was led away, Nolan turned to him. "You kept your door locked. You trusted your instincts, and theirs." Caleb knelt, hands resting on the dogs' backs. They leaned into him, tails wagging softly now, tension finally gone. "These dogs saved more than themselves," Nolan said quietly. "They prevented a second crime. Maybe worse." Caleb looked at them, understanding settling deep in his chest. He hadn't just rescued 2 animals. He'd been chosen. The forest slowly exhaled as the suspect was escorted away, boots crunching in steady rhythm toward the waiting vehicles. The tension that had gripped the trees all morning loosened, replaced by an almost reverent quiet. Caleb stood near the edge of the ravine, watching until the flashing lights disappeared beyond the bend in the road. Only then did he realize how cold he was. Sheriff Nolan returned, his posture finally relaxed. "You okay?" he asked. Caleb nodded, though his hands trembled slightly. "I think it's just catching up to me." Nolan glanced down at the dogs, now sitting calmly at Caleb's feet, alert but peaceful. They stayed focused the entire time. "That's rare. These aren't ordinary dogs." "No," Caleb said softly. "They're not." Back at the cabin, deputies finished documenting the scene. One officer lifted the loose porch plank again, shaking his head. "If you hadn't taken them in," he said, "we might have lost the trail completely." Caleb didn't answer. He was too busy watching the smaller dog curl up beside the heater, exhaustion finally winning. The larger one remained upright, eyes tracking every movement until the last cruiser pulled away. Sheriff Nolan handed Caleb a paper cup of coffee. "Animal Control will want to talk to you," he said carefully. "Protocol says we evaluate placement. Foster homes. Shelters." Caleb's jaw tightened. "They're not going anywhere tonight," Nolan added, meeting his gaze. "I'll make sure of that." For the first time since the storm, Caleb smiled. As dusk crept back in, the cabin returned to stillness. No sirens. No radios. Just the quiet crackle of the heater and 2 steady heartbeats nearby. Caleb sat on the floor, back against the couch, the dogs pressed against his sides. He realized something then, something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Not the kind that came with a uniform or a job title. The kind that arrived unexpectedly, scratching at your door in the middle of the night, and changed everything once you let it in. The next morning arrived quieter than any Caleb could remember. No storm. No flashing lights. Just pale winter sunlight filtering through the frost-laced windows. The dogs woke first. The larger one stretched and padded toward the door, sniffing carefully, while the smaller stayed close, watching Caleb with calm, watchful eyes. The danger was gone. But something else lingered. Caleb brewed coffee and stood by the window, scanning the tree line. That was when he noticed it. Fresh tracks that hadn't been there the day before. Not boot prints this time. Tire marks. A vehicle had idled near the edge of the road during the storm. "Someone else was here," he murmured. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Nolan returned, alone. He held a manila folder, his expression serious. "We ran the suspect's background," he said. "Career criminal. But here's the part that matters to you." He opened the folder and slid out a photo. It showed the dogs, months earlier, sitting beside the same man, outside a rundown trailer in Wisconsin. They weren't just abandoned, Nolan said. They were trained. Used. The suspect kept them to warn him when people got close. When he was shot during the robbery, they stayed with him. But when he collapsed near your place, they chose differently. Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. "They chose you," Nolan continued. "And by doing that, they broke the cycle." Caleb knelt and rested his forehead against the larger dog's neck. "You didn't run," he whispered. "You protected." Nolan closed the folder. "Animal Control won't fight you on this," he said. "You're officially their foster." As the sheriff left, Caleb sat back down, the dogs flanking him like silent guardians. Outside, the forest stood calm, no longer hiding secrets. Whatever those dogs had been trained to do before, this was who they were now. In the days that followed, the cabin felt different. Not louder. Not busier. Just fuller. The kind of fullness that settled into corners that had been empty for years. Caleb noticed it most in the mornings, when he reached for a second coffee mug out of habit and didn't feel the old ache that used to follow. The dogs settled into a rhythm quickly. The larger one, whom Caleb started calling Ridge, after the snowy rise behind the cabin, patrolled the property with quiet authority. The smaller dog, Ash, never strayed far from Caleb's side, following him from room to room as if memorizing his presence. Animal Control stopped by midweek. Paperwork was signed. Questions were asked. But the outcome was clear. "These dogs won't do well in a shelter," the officer admitted. "They're bonded. And frankly, They already chose you. That night, Caleb took them out for a walk along the tree line. The forest felt safer now, as if whatever darkness had passed through had taken its weight with it. Ridge paused at the edge of the woods, nose lifted, then relaxed. No warning growl. No tension. Ash sat beside Caleb, leaning into his leg. Caleb crouched, resting his hands on their shoulders. "You don't have to protect anymore," he said softly. "You're home." For the first time, Ridge's tail wagged freely. Later, as the fire crackled low, Caleb found himself telling them things he hadn't said out loud in years, about the calls he couldn't forget, the lives he couldn't save, the reason he'd come here to disappear. The dogs listened. They always did. And in that quiet exchange, something shifted. Caleb realized he hadn't just rescued them from the cold. They had rescued him from a silence he didn't know how to leave on his own. The first reporter showed up a week later. Caleb spotted the unfamiliar sedan before he heard the knock. It idled at the end of the drive, hesitant, as if unsure it belonged there. Ridge stood alert beside him on the porch, posture calm but unmistakably protective. Ash sat closer, eyes flicking between Caleb and the stranger. A woman stepped out, notebook tucked under her arm. "Mr. Rourke," she called gently. "I'm with the regional paper. Sheriff Nolan suggested I speak with you." Caleb sighed. He'd known this was coming. Word traveled fast in small towns, faster when dogs helped stop a violent fugitive. By the weekend, local radio mentioned the former firefighter and his 2 hero dogs. Photos surfaced. Questions followed. Caleb agreed to one interview. He didn't dramatize it. He talked about listening to instincts, about not opening the door when something felt wrong, about how animals often sense danger before people do. When asked if he felt like a hero, he shook his head. "The dogs are," he said simply. "I just let them in." The story spread anyway. Letters arrived. Emails too. Veterans. Retired first responders. People who felt lost, isolated, or worn thin by life. Many wrote about animals who had saved them when nothing else could. Caleb read every message by the fire, Ridge's head resting on his knee, Ash curled against his side. Then came the final letter, from the clerk who'd been shot during the robbery. It was short, handwritten, thanking him, thanking the dogs, saying recovery was slow, but happening. Caleb folded the letter carefully, throat tight. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft this time, peaceful. The cabin no longer felt like a place to hide. It felt like a place where something new had quietly begun. Winter settled fully into the Upper Peninsula, but the cabin no longer felt cut off from the world. Caleb noticed the change in small ways. The way mornings felt lighter. The way silence no longer pressed down on him, but rested gently instead. Ridge and Ash became fixtures of the land. They learned the paths of deer, the safe edges of frozen streams, the quiet hours when the forest breathed easiest. Ridge still paused at the porch each night, scanning the tree line out of habit. Ash still waited until Caleb turned off the lamp before curling up to sleep. Some instincts never left. One evening, as the fire burned low, Caleb stood at the door and looked out across the snow. He remembered the man who had knocked that night, how close danger had come without him ever seeing its face. He understood now that some doors were meant to stay shut. But not all of them. Caleb opened the door anyway, letting cold air rush in. Ridge didn't growl. Ash didn't bark. They stayed calm, trusting his judgment the way he had trusted theirs. "You're safe," he said quietly, to them and maybe to himself. In the months that followed, Caleb began volunteering again. Search and rescue training. Wildlife response. This time, he wasn't alone. Ridge and Ash trained. Beside him, natural and focused, no longer tools of fear, but partners of purpose. The cabin remained their home. a place of rest, a place of choice. Sometimes, late at night, Caleb would sit on the porch and listen to the woods, remembering how everything had changed because he answered a cry instead of ignoring it. Two dogs had arrived frozen and afraid. They left behind a man who had found his way back, and a door that, for the first time in years, stayed open, not out of fear, but because trust had finally come home. If this story moved you, it's because it reminds us of something simple but powerful. Compassion is never wasted. What began as two freezing dogs seeking shelter became a chain of events that protected lives, exposed danger, and gave purpose back to someone who thought his quiet days were behind him. Animals don't ask for much. Sometimes all they need is a door opened at the right moment, and when we listen, when we choose kindness over fear, the impact can reach far beyond what we ever imagine. If you believe in stories like this, where courage comes on four legs and healing works both ways, please take a moment to like this video. It helps these rescues reach more people who need hope right now. Subscribe to the channel if you want more real, emotional deep dive stories that honor both human and animal resilience. And I want to hear from you. Share in the comments where you're watching from and tell us, have you ever trusted your instinct to help an animal and found it changed your life too? Every view, every share, every comment helps keep these stories alive. Until the next rescue, stay kind, stay aware, and never ignore a cry in the cold.